Welcome to our presentation, Getting a Dollar from a Dime, or Making the Most of Your OverDrive Budget. I'm Bethany Richardson, Youth Materials Selector for Fairfax County Public Library. I select children's and teen materials in all formats, including digital.
And I'm Diane Cohen. I'm the Director of Technical Operations and Nonfiction Selector. And in addition to being a librarian, I have a background as a software product manager, which means I often think in terms of using data to inform my decisions. So why are we here? Now, it took FCPL, Fairfax County Public Library, 9 years to get to our first 2 million circulations, but it took us only 9 months to get to 2 million circulations this year. And we've learned a lot along the way. And then the pandemic forced us into decisions that we would not have made or been able to make in quote unquote normal times, which gave us a unique opportunity to learn quickly. And we are here to share our learning, especially from the last 20 months. We want to provide a framework for thinking about the best value for digital literary materials, ebooks, and not just the lowest cost. And we want to talk about learning more about your community and your community's use of digital collection by experimenting with marketing and lending models. And we want to share some tips and tricks that helped us along the way. So getting started you can get started by orienting yourself to where you are and maybe even where you've been. And you want to contextualize yourself within your community and within your environment. So having circulation and budget is extremely useful at all times. And from those, you can calculate your cost per circ. The size of your collection is super handy to have relevant, and you should have close round numbers at hand. Your unique users per month, the active cardholders and the number of residents gives you an ever widening circle of actual and potential customers. And by understanding this baseline, you can determine what's reasonable for your library, for your goals, and for your budget. So for Fairfax County, we are a 1.2 million service population. It's highly diverse and technically savvy, and they prefer to use mobile devices. FY21, our digital materials made up 10% of our total circulation and 26% of our total circulation. 10% of our total collection and 26% of our total circulation. So our digital materials work very hard and are in very high demand. And we have about 43,000 unique users per month on OverDrive.
So, with our voracious digital readership, we're really trying to squeeze dollars from dimes in OverDrive wherever we can. There's a lot of OverDrive lingo we'll be using today, so here's a quick overview of terms related to lending models. OCOU stands for One Copy, One User, a perpetual license that can be accessed by one borrower at a time. MA, or metered access, is still one borrower at a time, but constrained by time or by checkouts. When the time or checkouts run out, you must repurchase the license to keep that title in your collection. MACU is our shorthand for metered access concurrent users. You'll see this in OverDrive as MA 100 checkouts. Up to 100 users can check out copies simultaneously, and after 100 checkouts, you'll need to decide whether to repurchase. CPC stands for cost per circ. This is on demand, so you pay a set cost every time the title is checked out. SU, or simultaneous use, allows unlimited simultaneous use for a given time period. Participating publishers each have their own terms and packages. You can get bundles of a certain number of titles for a year, or one title for a month or 6 months. If you don't normally have high digital circulation, the one title per month option can dovetail nicely with special events for a reasonable cost. And titles not available in the packages on Marketplace may be requested as simultaneous use from the publisher through your OverDrive rep. This takes time, so plan ahead if you want to try for this. Lucky Day is actually less of a lending model than a circulation model. It allows you to designate some copies of a title as non-holdable and non-renewable to facilitate browsing and discovery of popular titles, usually with shorter checkout lengths and a limited number of copies per customer. And you can customize your Lucky Day lending policies separately. For instance, we allow one per customer with a 2-week checkout. Besides the purchasing models, there are some other OverDrive-related terms we'll be using today. Marketplace is OverDrive's customer interface for purchasing and curation. The website, site, or browser is the public's access point to the OverDrive collection, unless they're using Libby, OverDrive's soon-to-be only app. A carousel is a visually appealing display of book covers in a row, like a shelf of face-out physical books. The titles shown in it are part of a curated collection, which can be put together by library or OverDrive staff. Now, a campaign is essentially a single title carousel that gets top billing. Think Big Library Read. It shows one title with a customized description. An alternate format of the same work can be linked. For example, the e-audiobook if you're highlighting an ebook, or vice versa. It's important to note that campaigns will display in Libby, while small carousels will not. Libby has limitations on carousels that prevent them from displaying if there are not enough titles in the collection. And one final note is that campaigns must be coordinated with OverDrive staff, so you do have a little bit of planning ahead necessary with that one. And an e-reading room is a dedicated virtual space for materials that fit the room's designated criteria. For example, kids, teen, or available now. In Libby, these are referred to as guides. So, how about those dollars from dimes? I'm going to start us off with some basic considerations for getting the most out of your OverDrive budget. For titles with the option of OCOU or MA, it can be helpful to purchase at least one OCOU and then use MA to meet demand. You may not need to renew all the MA when they expire, but you'll still have the OCOU to keep depth in your collection. You can get a sense of how many OCOU copies would be useful on a long-term basis by looking at the performance of past titles in the series or by the same author. For debuts, you'll just have to use your super select or spidey senses. If given options for metered access by time, choose 12 months over 24 months. It's half the price, and you might not need to repurchase as many copies after a year. When it's possible, opt for metered access by checkouts rather than time, so you don't risk losing the chance for checkouts. So to explain that, let's get into a little bit of math and find out our best case scenario for checkouts on a 12-month MA title. We have a 3-week lending period, so 12 months is 52 weeks, and 52 divided by 3 equals 17 checkouts per year. So the cost of the title divided by 17 checkouts is our best case calculated cost per circ. Since metered access by checkouts allows for 26 checkouts versus 17, metered by checkouts is clearly the way to go if possible. Now, of course, you don't get to choose between these models on one title, but if you're choosing between two similar titles, you can lean toward metered access by checkouts. For You'll Be the Death of Me, $1.32 is our best case calculated cost per circ. So if you're thinking about using cost per circ for this title, $4.50 doesn't make much sense in comparison, unless you're looking to fill holds quickly or support a program. This is a case where, depending on your goals, best value might not equal lowest cost. Speaking of CPC, cost per circ really scared us because of our voracious readership. But in targeted situations, we've realized it can be very useful. You can use it when you have specific goals, like getting a title into hands now for current events, seasonal materials, book clubs, or just to buy down a holds list and make folks happy. If you are trying to get a book into the hands of everyone who's placed a hold, say 100 people right now, it can cost much less overall to do this with CPC than with other models. For the vanishing half, 100 CPC would be about $250, as opposed to about $1,200 for the same number of metered access copies to fill all those holds. Of course, you'll need to weigh the pros and cons of fast fulfillment versus longevity of those copies. It all goes back to what your goal is. To keep your budget under control, you can set a monthly budget cap and limit the number of CPC checkouts per customer. You can compare your best case scenario metered access cost per checkout to the CPC price. So, The Secret Life of the Savoy by Olivia Williams is $75.99 for metered access 24 months. So, the best case scenario price there is $2.17, calculated cost per circ. The CPC price is 95 cents. In this case, definitely go with CPC. However, these cases of CPC being a better deal are few and far between. The big problem is that it's difficult to compare costs. But you can always try having side-by-side tabs to double-check titles in CPC for cost, or take the ISBNs from a cart worksheet and paste them into an advanced search in CPC. Okay, so since I mentioned going back and forth between the cost per circ part of Marketplace and the one copy, one user and metered access section of Marketplace, I want to digress with a quick tip that can be so useful. Instead of toggling between tabs or using the drop-down constantly to switch between the segments of Marketplace, you can simply adjust the URL. So say I've done a search for Rick Riordan. I'm seeing 304 results, but I want to know what availability there is in CPC. I can simply highlight the portion of the URL that reads one copy, one user, and metered access, replace it with cost per circ, and hit enter. Now I can see what's available in CPC. This trick works for curation too, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Getting back to lending models, let's talk a bit about MACU. We've been so happy to have this licensing option. It does cost more, but it can provide significant benefits, especially in allowing customers immediate access to a title. For example, The Hobbit e-audio costs about $175 for MACU versus $109 for OCOU. Assuming 17 checkouts per year, that equates to $1.74 per checkout for MACU versus $6.40 per checkout for OCOU. So that's not bad. Now, the big caveat is that these calculations hold true only for the first year, and your calculated cost per circ for the one copy, one user item will go down over time. And just so you know, if you have both models and an OCOU license is available, that license, that copy, will check out before drawing down from your MACU licenses. MACU availability can disappear without warning, so if you think a title has staying power, go ahead and stock up on what you can afford. They'll eventually check out, they're not going to expire, so your money won't be wasted. You can do an advanced search for titles with holds that are available in MACU to see what you might be able to get that would be in demand. We have used MACU for branch and system book club titles, Hispanic Heritage Month promotions, Netflix and streaming tie-ins, and just because it makes people happy. Since many of our titles have significant wait times, available popular titles are just an unexpected delight. While simultaneous use packages may seem extremely expensive, they can deliver huge bang for your buck, especially if promoted effectively. For us in 2020, Blackstone audio titles cost $90 per title, no matter what size package we chose. Now it's $144 per title because we went up a pricing tier. Package pricing is tiered based on circulation. So for 2020, this meant that our average calculated cost per circ for the year for this package was 29 cents. Compared to our total calculated cost per circ of 62 cents, that's significant savings and significant customer satisfaction. Now, this is for us and our voracious readership, but simultaneous use can be great for systems of all sizes, especially since pricing is lower for smaller systems. You can start with a small package and publicize it heavily, see how they do for a year, and then go from there. Or you can take advantage of the various pandemic packages that were gifted by OverDrive and publishers in simultaneous use. Check out the tip sheet to learn how to find and highlight those. Simultaneous use's strength currently is in e-audio. There are some ebook simultaneous use packages, but not as many or as well known of titles. Our best simultaneous use ebook purchase has been from Biblioboard. Their Book Life Elite and Indie Author Project packages include indie author titles that have been vetted and highlighted. Their 99-year option is basically perpetual simultaneous use, which is awesome and doesn't exist anywhere else in OverDrive. Now, let's talk a little bit about automated carts. The main takeaway of this slide is don't take anything for granted. Double check OverDrive's suggestions for purchase to make sure that your automations are doing what you want. So when renewing metered access, depending on your system's volume, I like to set all titles to a quantity of 1, and then sort by holds to decide how many copies we need now. For time-metered licenses, OverDrive will suggest that you repurchase all the copies that are expiring, but you probably no longer need them all. Then, if I have time, I may also dig deeper, looking at data points like copies currently checked out, checkouts in the past year, and the most recent checkout date. Now, for the holds manager, in your settings, we suggest setting your holds ratio for these automated carts to your goal ratio plus a little bit extra. So in this case, 6.01. 6 to 1 is our holds ratio goal. If you don't add that little bit extra, the automated cart will recommend that you purchase copies when you're already meeting your ratio exactly. Before we realized that this was happening, we were occasionally buying more than we really needed to meet our ratio. For us, with the number of holds we get for some popular titles, this could make a big difference. And do your own calculations to verify the numbers you're getting from OverDrive. We've got a couple calculations in the handout that you can use. For example, OverDrive doesn't take into account the fact that each copy you buy decreases the number of holds by 1. And sometimes accounting for that will allow you to shave off a few copies. Now, for the most universal dollars from dimes tip we can recommend, marketing. Marketing is something you can and should do, no matter how large your system or budget is. There are lots of avenues for marketing, but we'll focus on marketing within the OverDrive platform for today via curating collections. Curation can be crowdsourced, which we highly recommend. Curate-only accounts for staff are easy to create, with no worries about accidental purchasing. We have a lot of super creative branch staff at FCPL who curate along with our selection staff. They have a great time with it, and our customers really enjoy the variety of the lists they put together, from family road trip e-audio to ebooks with one-word titles. So many fun possibilities. I have a Getting Started with Curation document for staff that I'd be happy to share, and there's also a 20-minute video on Marketplace help. This could even be a possible activity for teen volunteers. It is possible to link directly to curated collections, so they can be a great addition to social media posts or even to program descriptions. Now, to get back to the URL magic I mentioned earlier for marketing, you can take any list created by OverDrive staff and easily turn it into a curated collection. For example, in the Featured tab, you can find all sorts of timely lists that OverDrive creates to help you shop. But you can also use them to create collections. So say I want to take the trending on Book Talk list. I just need to replace the URL text one copy, one user, and metered access with curate, and all the titles that we own will appear with the option to add them to a curated collection. This can make it really easy to keep your OverDrive pages fresh without a ton of effort, since OverDrive provides lots of different lists for you to purchase from. You can turn that into curation.
Now, when I worked in product development, we used something called agile techniques, and our mantra was to fail fast, which was actually shorthand for learn fast. And when the pandemic hit, Fairfax County had a very short window of no spending on print. It was all digital all the time for a few months. And the publishers were being helpful with their models, half price for half term. So it was time for us to learn. And we became super opportunistic data wise because in that last 3 months of fiscal year 20, all materials funding were diverted into digital. And that's not a decision that we would have made unless something big was going on, like a global pandemic. So cost per circ was used for the first time in that May or June for May-June timeframe for anti-racist reads, because this was not the time for wait lists. Our goal was to get books into hands as fast as possible. And as Bethany mentioned, we had been extremely leery of this model because of our circulation. So we now needed to know how to use it with control. Now, another thing that was happening was our RB Digital Unlimited subscription, which was 28,000 titles of simultaneous use e-audiobooks, would be migrated into the OverDrive platform. Woo! And we would get to see firsthand just what was going to happen when unfettered demand met unlimited usage. But it would go away 6 months later. So we had no replacement option. Did I mention things we would not have made, decisions we would not have made for ourselves? So we knew that we were going to want to soften or somehow mitigate the loss when this subscription ended. So we created ebook of the month, which was a way for us to both measure what was happening with our ebooks and to kind of mitigate the challenges with losing our simultaneous use. So just a quick minor digression here. I wanted to provide a visual representation of what we ended up leaning into. And what you're seeing here, this jump at the end of the this chart is not a pandemic jump. It's an availability leap. This is from when we migrated our RB Unlimited collection into our primary, our OverDrive platform. And we were expecting an increase, but we were not expecting this. This is 15 to 20,000 more checkouts per month. And choosing to do this was not a decision we would have made willingly. But it was happening, so we needed to figure out what to do about it. And as we indicated, circulation is not our problem. Understanding how to control its impact on our budget was our problem. So we needed to get more granular information. What would happen if we had regular simultaneous use books available consistently? And would we see a different impact based on how we marketed or presented our items? And could we refine our understanding of when we should be buying which models if multiple models were actually available to us? And then, of course, how could we calculate our cost per circ beyond just a budget cap? So our intent and how ebook of the month started was we would run 2 ebooks, an adult and a youth, for 30 days, simultaneous use. And if available, we would include the e-audio out of that RB Digital Unlimited collection for the first 6 months. And they would display in their own carousel and the OverDrive app in the browser, but not Libby. And we would create thematically appropriate supporting carousels with cost per circ peppered in to ensure availability. And then we would track pretty much everything. So, from those screenshots, we started a little bit extra and we learned really quickly that we could pare back and still get what we needed. So we immediately changed some things. The supporting carousels, as a default, they were gone. There was no measurable return for the cost it took to create them and to spend on the on the cost per circ. And based on Digipalooza, the OverDrive user conference that was recently held, it sounded like they're going to be measurable. Those carousels will be measurable soon, but they aren't now. So we might revisit then. We also decide to only collect major data points. The cost and model being used, the dates we ran things, the audience, any observations, anecdotal observations from when we were reviewing, and notes for things that might impact our numbers, such as it was running concurrent to a Netflix or something like that. And of course, specific data around what we were trying to figure out. For example, impact on holds in a different format, ebook versus e-audio circulation, that type of thing. And we also discovered that splitting attention between 2 age groups was doing us no favors. So we decided to keep an eye on that and probably switch to the campaign style or that larger hero image that we would go for. So numbers are great, but visualizing helps to see what I call data pops. Our initial analysis showed us things that made us pay closer attention, frequently having us dig deeper in some kind of subsequent experiment looking for another explanation or for any explanation. For instance, this is an example of a data pop. You know, you're chugging along at 1 to 5 circulations or so with your normal, and then boom. Now, anyone seeing this would ask, what happened in August? You know, well, August is when we featured it as an ebook of the month. So not everything is going to be at this level, but you will see data pops. So visualization is a good thing. Now, we wanted to get information on simultaneous use versus cost per circulation for our children's material. And this turned out to be just math, literally. My observation from note from January was, yikes, kids, for that $4.28 CPC, calculated cost per circ, excuse me. And we made a note to retest this with other titles, and we did multiple times, as you can see on this list. And we determined that for juvenile materials, at best, there was only a slight advantage to simultaneous use. And that was generally with a hook of some sort, such as featuring women who dared during Women's History Month. So our conclusion was that we're not going to shy away from children's materials. We just needed to be very careful with the circulation. Now, ebook versus e-audio was another area where we wanted more visibility. And we wanted to know, if readily available, how much more was the ebook being checked out than the e-audio? And we did find that ebook was more dominant with adult fiction with a 60-40 split, but that didn't hold true across the board. For other areas, for other ages in fictionality, we saw juvenile and teen were almost a 50-50 split, and adult nonfiction fell in between fiction and juvenile materials. And this was from a small sample size, and we should dig deeper, but this was solid enough to use as guidance. Now, I do want to kind of talk about biases or influences, and you should be aware of your biases, of possible influences on the data or on your reading of the data. And when it comes to reading your own data, be aware what you're comparing to. Now, my initial reaction with the PANTS project was that it only did okay. But my mindset, or my bias, if you will, was toward aggregate circulation numbers. That's what I normally looked at. But when I compared it to itself, in the 3 years since it was added, there were 135 checkouts on both formats. But during its 30 days as an ebook of the month, there were over 200. And this data, when you take it and you compare it to itself, is much more than just okay. So be careful what you compare it to. You should also be aware of other factors that could impact your data. Here in Fairfax County, we have a natural heartbeat or a seasonal circulation pattern that we can see very regularly. Whenever there's a tie-in to a movie or streaming, or there's an Oprah or a Reese pick, that can influence your data. Big programs or festivals in the area, like the Fall for the Book for us, that's something that we're aware of. So to hop on my soapbox for just a moment, data can tell you a lot of stories, but it should never, ever tell you fairy tales. Data just is, at least in its raw format. Understand that you can look at it from multiple different angles, but don't lie to yourself with the data, because the point is to learn so that you can adjust and adapt in the service of your customers and your fiduciary responsibilities. Okay, I'm going to hop back off. And I'm going to go into a deeper dive for June, July, and August for our ebook of the month. June is when we did our first campaign, and July provided us an opportunity for some major marketing that we wouldn't be able to get elsewhere. And August was our first real deep dive after having set a general baseline on some things. So we wanted to get more specific impacts. So our first campaign with an e-audio tie-in, and this was no different really from what Big Library Read was doing, except maybe we ran it longer. Um, and I'll be honest, the data didn't give us a whole lot of different or more information than we had seen from our big library read data. However, the e-audiobook format of the title that we picked could give us a unique perspective on something. Now, Radium Girls, the e-audio had already had a couple of copies in OverDrive when our RB Unlimited package migrated in. So we were able to see trends on this particular title pre-pandemic with one copy, one user, pandemic with just the one copy, one user, pandemic with simultaneous use, and then as it was highlighted as an ebook of the month. And, after when we had to kind of backfill it with the MacU licenses because we overran our, we generated a whole lot of holds on it that we needed to now fill. So it's a very interesting way to visualize data, and it might be something you'd be interested in doing. Now, July. July felt like, to me at least, a hot mess. But it was probably because of the confluence of events that was going on. We decided at the end of May to do a hard left turn. We were closing a fiscal year at the same time. We were prepping for ALA and for full service reopening of the library, and I was planning on taking a week off. So I'm just saying all this to let you know that as you're running these experiments and as you're making your decisions, there are going to be times when you think everything is just crazy cakes. And just take a deep breath, close your eyes, and lean into it. Because, crazy cakes, fine. At least there's cake. So that's just kind of a booster to let you know about that. Now, our hard pivot that we did on that left turn was being opportunistic, and it was caused by two factors. And one was realizing that the big library read would be running for 2 weeks, and that had just been missed along the way. And thanks to Bethany, getting late breaking information on the Washington Post Kids Summer reading list, where we saw that two of those titles were available in a cost per circ model, and they happened to be in the 2 weeks following the big library read. So we pivoted and we shifted to the big library read and to Washington Post Kids title instead of what we had originally planned. We felt that running the 2 1-week unlimited titles would give us kind of a most favorable conditions for children's materials in terms of the maximum circulations we might get for something. And we ran each one as a campaign. So it displayed front, center, and it displayed on all platforms. And each was a Kids Summer read during the same week that we were highlighting it. We marketed it with both our social media and as part of our own summer reading adventure. And each one of these was the highest circulating ebook for that week with 150 and 110 checkouts respectively. So we effectively found by doing that pivot the upper boundary for cost for a children's material. And now we can use this information to inform decisions that we're making around programming. So for a children's ebook of a reasonably popular author, 150 checkouts times the cost per circ times the number of weeks run, for us, that is very likely our highest possible cost because there are a lot fewer checkouts over the week, and we don't have the same reach as the Washington Post readership. So our 100 checkouts, again, times the cost per circ, times the number of week run, is probably closer to the mark, but it's still going to depend on our popularity and our marketing. So for discussions with our programming staff, I contextualize what we found with the Washington Post experiment with Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. If that had been a $1.99 cost per circ ebook instead of a pandemic simultaneous use donation, it would have cost us $1,400 in its best month and just under $900 in its second best month. And I use that to contextualize to let programming staff, think about their titles and their author's popularity for comparison. In August, we wanted to get some visibility into the impact of an ebook of the month, or of highlighting something, the impact on the series and on the e-audio of something if we are featuring the ebook. We selected Furyborn. We added a little more information because for fans of Shadow and Bone, because not only is that a comp, but it was running on Netflix just previous to this. And like I said, we wanted to get some level of visibility. Now, one test does not confirm assumptions, but it does a whole lot of work to dispel them or to invalidate your assumptions. And for us, it raised a lot of questions. Now, for this presentation, um, I annotated a printout of our visualization for that kind of matched the conversation that was happening as we were looking at this. And we had our normal weekend pattern, those two circled areas that you see there. And while I'm not saying that it made us think of Daniel Craig on Saturday Night Live, I'm not saying that either. But like I said, we had a big initial rise, and we had an unexpected second rise during week 3, and then a big drop off just earlier than expected. And we didn't know what to make of that. Well, turns out, digging a little deeper, that the big drop was a user error. I had typed in the 20th when I meant the 30th. It was pulled exactly when I had told them to pull it. And while we investigated this second kind of data rise, we still can't explain it. We did find that most of those checkouts were coming from mobile, but we have no reason why the timing was deferred. So, we'll keep looking at data. We'll keep looking for something like that, and we'll see if something shows up later. Now, what we were after was impact on the other titles and formats. And like I said, we featured Furyborn, which is a young adult series starter. And we did find that the e-audio for the featured ebook generated significant holds. There were 129 holds generated in this ebook while the ebook campaign was running. And we also found that demand on the following ebooks in the series increased, but with declining increases the deeper you went into the series, which actually matches what we have been seeing in print as well. So, how's it going? What have we found? For us, the single campaign provides the most circulation benefit in terms of checkouts. It shows in Libby, and our community is about mobile devices. So we know that running a campaign versus running a carousel will give us differences in if we're running something as a cost per circ, say. We no longer do supporting carousels without some kind of specific hook. This might change, as I said, with carousel engagement data capabilities, but they're not here yet. We only collect major data points: cost, model, dates, calculated cost per circ, and audience. The experimenting is continuing. We are iterating through various feedback loops. We're tweaking, we're making observations, we're running down rabbit holes. And we're applying our learning to expanding our programming support using the cost per circ model in the digital. So the CPC model for a partnership with, we use that for a partnership with the Washington Nationals. One of our branches did a Josh Bell book club, and we used cost per circ to highlight those materials and make them available where we could. We use that cost per circ model to support another branch book club that's Terry Pratchett. They're running an entire year of Discworld going through in sequence, and it's a very small cost and a very happy book club. And there are some gems that we've found along the way. One of these things is have an experiments budget. It gives you a level of freedom, knowing that you're not going to be impacting normal operations unexpectedly. Like when we did that major pivot, having a separate kind of experimentation budget made us realize that we weren't going to be adversely impacting day-to-day things. And we were able to do that quickly. I recommend getting your patron profile report from OverDrive. Now, we haven't talked about that at all. It's in the handout. And everything we've been talking about has been all about circulation, but the patron profile report can give you some really good insights on your customer base for decisions like, how might the raising of the checkout or the hold limit impact our customers and subsequently our usage within that. So that can give you some good insights. And even if you don't buy simultaneous use, you can market the gift orders from the publishers and from OverDrive. See the handout see the handout for instructions on finding those orders. And what we found was what was provided to us over the pandemic ended up being about 1% of our circulation. So while it wasn't like a massive impact, it was nothing to be sneezed at either. Um, Bethany, let me hand it over to you for other items.
Yes, so as I mentioned before, we highly recommend curating and using crowdsourced staff members to help out with your curation. The more staff members you can get to help, the more variety of curated lists you can provide, and it's really beneficial for customers and a lot of fun for staff. For your curation settings, we'd recommend sorting randomly and showing all titles, but showing available first, unless you're putting a collection into an available now room, in which case there are limiters where you can make sure that only available titles will show up. For curation, you can also highlight your existing simultaneous use. As Diane mentioned, some of those were gifted during the pandemic from OverDrive and publishers. So making sure that you put those front and center is really helpful and will help your overall calculated cost per circ a lot. And then you can showcase things like expiring metered access content in something like a last chance before they leave carousel. So you can make sure that you get the most out of something that's about to expire. There is a search strategy for that in the handout. And then take advantage of the URL magic that we talked about. It's in the handout as well. It has lots of uses for shopping and marketing. And then there's also something we like to call the aquarium for librarians. You can get that from your OverDrive rep as a link to embed on web pages. You can ask them for your dashboard. What it does is it'll display checkout and hold activity right now, as well as over time. So it's kind of a ticker of what's going on at this minute, of what are people checking out, what are people putting holds on, and it shows book covers. Is really engaging. So
And
that's a lot of fun.
I'll show that at the end if people want to stay on the recording for that.
Okay, perfect. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch with us. And thank you so much for listening.
Thanks, everyone. And I will leave us showing the aquarium for librarians. Enjoy.